The thing that got me wasn't the beep from the door lock. It was that I heard it twice, clear as anything, and then nothing happened. I was at the little dining table by the kitchen, laptop open, a mug of gas station coffee I'd reheated twice sitting beside me, trying to fix the same paragraph for maybe the 10th time. The cabin was otherwise dead quiet. You could hear the refrigerator kick on from the other side of the room. So when the keypad on the front door made that sharp electronic chirp, then did it again, a second later, I looked up automatically and waited for the handle to move. It didn't. I kept staring at the door, thinking maybe somebody had the wrong code, or maybe I imagined it, which didn't make sense because it had that specific cheap keypad sound that you don't confuse with anything else. I listened for the door to open. I listened for a voice outside. All I heard was the lake through the trees, and that soft house creaking old wood cabins do after dark. Then, after maybe 10 seconds, I realized I was holding my breath over a door that was supposed to be the only locked thing between me and a whole lot of nobody. I booked that cabin because I wanted exactly that, a whole lot of nobody. I had about 2 weeks before I was supposed to start a new job. One of those jobs where people smile and say stuff like, "This is a great opportunity," which is true, but what they really mean is, you can kiss your free time goodbye for a while. I write fiction on the side, nothing glamorous, nothing that's paid my rent even once. But I'd been telling myself for months that if I could just get one uninterrupted stretch of time, I'd finally finish a first draft I was stuck in the middle of. So I rented a lakeside Airbnb outside Coeur d'Alene for a few nights. The listing was basically engineered in a lab to get somebody like me to click on it. Total privacy, fast internet, self-check-in, dock access, quiet workspace. There were pictures of a pine table facing a wide window toward the water, a little upstairs bedroom tucked under the sloped roof, and a porch with 2 weathered chairs that looked like they belonged in a coffee commercial. The host messaged me before I even left home, then again while I was driving, then once more, about an hour before check-in, telling me the gravel driveway could be easy to miss after dark, and recommending a burger place in town, plus a trail with a good overlook if I wanted to clear my head. He wasn't rude. If anything, he was almost aggressively helpful, friendly in a way that felt practiced, like he'd learned exactly how attentive he was supposed to seem. At the time, I thought that was a good sign. The place itself matched the listing almost perfectly. That honestly made me trust it more. Usually with rentals, the photos are from 10 years ago, or shot from weird angles that make a closet look like a living room. This place looked like what it said it was. Small cabin, 1 main room downstairs, kitchen on one side, couch and TV on the other, narrow staircase up to the loft bedroom. 1 bathroom off the kitchen, a detached storage shed a little way down from the cabin, closer to the water. Single gravel driveway in and out, no other approach, unless you wanted to hike through trees in the dark. I remember stupid details because those are the details I kept replaying later. The front rug by the door had a faded bear on it. One of the cabinet doors under the sink hung slightly crooked. The upstairs bedroom had a navy quilt and those tiny string lights along the headboard that look cozy in photos and kind of sad in real life. There was a laminated house manual on the counter with the Wi-Fi name, checkout instructions, and a note asking guests not to use the fireplace without approval. I unpacked, brought my cooler in, set my notebook and laptop at the table, and actually had a really good first few hours. I wrote more that evening than I had in the last month. Around sunset, I took one of the porch chairs and turned it toward the water. It smelled like damp wood and cold lake water and pine needles. I remember thinking I had made exactly the right call coming out there. By the time it got fully dark, I had settled into a rhythm. Write for 40 minutes, pace around, look out the window, go back to the draft. That was the whole plan. Nothing exciting. That's why the first beep didn't even scare me. Not really. It just knocked me out of focus. I got up and checked the door. It was locked. I opened it and looked out anyway, because now I was curious. The porch was empty. The gravel driveway was just a pale line in the dark. No headlights, no person, no movement. I remember leaning out and feeling that cold air on my face, and hearing a little slap of water against the dock. I shut the door, locked it again, and stood there another second. Then I remembered something from one of the host's earlier messages. He'd said the electronic lock battery had been acting up, and he was planning to replace it soon. So if it made an extra noise, it's not to worry. I actually felt embarrassed once I remembered that. Like I had already started acting like a city person in a cabin, jumping at normal house stuff. So I went back to the table. About 20 minutes later, I stepped out to the porch with my mug, because the coffee tasted like burned rubber inside, and only slightly less bad outside. I was out there maybe 3 minutes. Not long enough to lose track of what was happening in the cabin. I wasn't drinking, wasn't on anything, wasn't sleep deprived. I know exactly what I left behind me. The kitchen cabinets were all closed. When I came back in, the 2 upper cabinets over the counter were standing open. Not wide open, not swung all the way out. Just open enough that you notice immediately, because it changes the shape of the room. One had mugs in it, one had plates. I stopped with the door half shut behind me and just looked at them. This is where people always want to jump straight to somebody being in the house, but that wasn't where my mind went first. First, I thought I must have opened them earlier while I was putting groceries away and somehow not registered it. Then I thought maybe old hinges, maybe I closed them badly. Maybe one of those slow, weird shifts in old cabins made them drift open. All normal explanations, all reasonable. I even tested one. I closed it, stood there, waited, and after a few seconds, it eased itself back open maybe half an inch. That helped. Not completely, but enough. I texted the host, Jay, just casually asking if the cabinets tended to swing open on their own, because I thought I was losing it a little. He replied fast, too fast, maybe 30 seconds. Old place, lots of settling. Hope you're enjoying it. The upstairs bed is the best part of the cabin. That should have been nothing. I know that. It's a cabin with 1 bedroom. The listing showed the upstairs bed. He was probably just making conversation. But I hadn't mentioned the bedroom. I hadn't mentioned where I planned to sleep. And something about seeing the words upstairs bed on my phone while standing alone in that kitchen made me look up toward the loft without meaning to. I told myself that was ridiculous. He owned the place. Of course he knew the layout. Of course he referred to the bedroom. It would have been stranger if he didn't. Still, after that, I started noticing the place differently. Not as a rental, as somebody else's space. The boots lined up by the back door were probably decorative, but looked worn enough to be real. The fishing net hangs in the shed window. The framed black and white photo of the lake in winter that was crooked by maybe half an inch, like somebody had straightened it by hand and missed. The pantry shelf with spices no guest would use on a weekend trip. All these little signs that this place wasn't a clean, empty box being temporarily occupied. It felt like a cabin someone had reluctantly pushed guests into while still wanting access to it whenever he felt like it. That thought bothered me. Then it faded a little. Then I made myself get over it, because I was out there to work, not to spiral over a text message about a bed. I wrote for another hour, maybe more. At some point, I heated leftover pasta, ate it standing over the sink, and took my plate upstairs, because I wanted to read in bed for a bit. I remember brushing my teeth in that tiny bathroom and thinking how quiet the whole property was. Not peaceful, quiet, just blank. The kind where every little sound the cabin makes starts to feel personal. I was almost asleep when the keypad beeped again. This time, I sat straight up immediately. 2 beeps, then a pause, then the faintest pressure on the handle, like whoever was outside didn't want to make noise. I got out of bed and went to the top of the stairs without turning on the loft light. From there, I could see the front door and part of the living room. Nothing moved. I could hear my own breathing, and from outside, after a second, footsteps on the porch, slow steps. one side of the cabin to the other. I stayed there thinking, okay, maybe it really is the host. Maybe something triggered the lock. Maybe he's out checking it. Maybe there actually is weather coming in. Maybe he texted and I didn't hear it. I checked my phone. No message. The footsteps went off the porch and onto gravel. Not leaving. Circling. I don't know how to explain what that did to me exactly. It wasn't a burst of panic. It was more like my body started reallocating resources without asking me. My hands got clumsy. My mouth went dry. All at once, the cabin felt smaller than it had all day. Not cozy small. Temporary small. Like there wasn't enough structure between me and the outside. I went downstairs as quietly as I could and locked the back door, even though I was pretty sure I'd already locked it. Then I turned off the light over the stove and the lamp by the couch, leaving only the little range hood clock glowing green in the dark. I stood by the window beside the front door and listened. The steps moved past the wall where the kitchen was, then toward the back, then stopped. A minute passed, then another. No more footsteps. I waited a little longer, told myself they were gone, and actually felt that first little drop in tension, that stupid hopeful thought that whatever this was had already peaked and was over. I even checked my phone again and saw a notification from the Airbnb app. The host had sent another message. Everything okay over there? Just making sure the place is treating you right. That was the moment when the explanations started fighting each other. If he was just checking in as a host, why phrase it like that right after somebody walked around the cabin in the dark? If he'd been the one outside, why not just say that? If he hadn't been outside, then why was he messaging exactly then? I typed and deleted about 4 replies. Finally, I sent back, "Yep, all good, just heading to bed." He read it and didn't answer. Again, I tried to calm myself down. I told myself maybe he lived nearby and had come to grab something from the shed. Maybe he saw a light on and didn't want to bother me. Maybe he realized it looked weird and texted afterward to smooth it over. Unprofessional, yes. Creepy, a little. Dangerous, not necessarily. I stayed downstairs another 20 minutes before going back up. I did not sleep. Every little sound had context now. A tap somewhere in the wall could be old pipes, or it could be somebody brushing the siding. A branch against the roof could be a whir, or a hand. I kept checking the phone clock, then telling myself not to. At one point, I almost laughed at myself, because I was holding my breath to hear better, and the sound I kept tracking was just my own pulse in my ears. Then I heard metal, not from the cabin, from the direction of the detached shed. A key, or a latch, or something with that little definite click of human intent behind it. I slid out of bed and moved to the window at the front of the loft. The curtains weren't blackout curtains, just those thin beige panels that hide less than people think. I pulled one aside, maybe half an inch. I could see the side yard, the slope toward the water, and part of the shed in profile under the yard light. The host was standing there. I'd only seen his profile photo in the app, but it was him. Same beard, same ball cap, no confusion. He was using a key on the shed door, calm as anything, like this was a normal stop he made every night. He opened it, leaned inside for a few seconds, then shut it again. I remember this part so clearly because it was the exact instant the situation changed. Up until then, I was trying to sort out whether something weird was happening around me. Looking through that curtain, seeing the owner on the property after midnight, using his own key while I was inside, I understood the problem all at once. He did not think of me as somebody currently staying there. He thought of me as an inconvenience in his space. And before I could even fully process that, he turned and walked back toward the cabin. Not to his car, not down the driveway, straight to the front door. I barely got the curtain back into place before the keypad chirped again. Then the handle moved harder this time. Not banging, not frantic, just a firm test, like he expected it to open if he did it right. I backed away from the window so fast I clipped my shin on the bed frame. I didn't even feel it until later. I just knew I needed distance between me and that glass. My hands were shaking enough that I almost dropped my phone trying to unlock it, and when the dispatcher answered, I had to start over, because my first sentence came out too fast to understand. I told her I was alone in a remote rental cabin. The owner was outside trying to get in. He had already accessed another building on the property, and I needed deputies sent out. She asked if he had forced entry. I said not yet. She asked if I knew whether he was armed. I said I had no idea. She asked if I could leave through another exit. I looked at the black windows and the single gravel driveway and said no. I really didn't think that was safer. She told me to stay on the line. What followed is the part that still gets to me, because this is where the spiral really tightened. He stopped trying the front door. For maybe 5 full minutes, there was nothing. Then I heard steps at the back of the cabin. Then the soft scrape of somebody testing that handle too. I went downstairs because, for some reason, the idea of being trapped in the loft felt worse than being on the main floor. I started moving furniture without thinking too hard about it. The dining chairs first, useless except for noise. Then the little table was shoved against the front door. Then the armchair was dragged over the floorboards to brace the back. I wasn't making some movie barricade. I was just doing the one physical thing available to me. The dispatcher kept talking, asking if I could still hear him, asking if any windows were being tampered with. I remember telling her somebody was moving along the wall outside the kitchen. I remember how stupidly loud the furniture sounded in that little cabin. I remember one of the table legs catching on the rug with the faded bear on it, and my brain noticing that detail even then, like part of me was still documenting. At some point, my phone buzzed against my hand with another message from the host. Saw your lights moving around. Don't panic. Just checking storm damage. There had been no storm, not even worth mentioning. I think that message scared me more than the handles, because it meant he knew I was awake, knew I was moving from room to room, maybe knew I was on the phone, and still thought he could narrate the situation for me in a way that made sense. The dispatcher told me deputies were on the way from town, and it would be a while. That's how remote it was. A while. Not 10 minutes. A while. She asked if I could keep an eye on the front door. I said yes, but I didn't want to stand near the window anymore. So I crouched beside the couch where I could see the door and the staircase at the same time, with the coffee table shoved uselessly near my knees, and my laptop still open on the dining table like I might get back to work after this. He kept moving around outside, not constantly. In intervals, porch, silence, gravel, silence. At one point I heard what sounded like the shed again, opening and shutting. At another point, I heard a car door, which gave me this ridiculous little surge of hope that he was leaving, except no engine followed, just more silence. That was the worst part of the whole night, not the obvious moments, the gaps, the long stretches where I had no idea whether he was still 10 feet from the cabin or halfway down the driveway waiting. I don't know how long that lasted. Hours, probably, though it felt detached from normal time. The black outside the windows started to turn that thin early gray that doesn't help much except tell you morning is possible. Birds started up somewhere near the water. My legs had gone numb from crouching. The dispatcher had changed once, maybe twice. I was still inside, still whispering updates, still jumping at every sound. Then I finally heard a different kind of vehicle in the driveway. Heavy, deliberate, more than one. The dispatcher said, "Deputies are there. Stay inside until they make contact." I looked through the curtain gap again, just enough to see shapes. 2 county vehicles, flashing lights muted in the dawn. One deputy by the driveway, another moving toward the porch, and the host, standing near the shed with both hands out a little from his sides like he couldn't believe any of this was necessary. When the deputy knocked and identified himself, I almost couldn't move the furniture because my hands had stiffened up so badly. I had to shove the table sideways with my hip. When I opened the door, the cold air hit me, and I realized the cabin smelled like stale coffee, and my own sweat and that dry, hot metal smell electronics give off when they've been on too long. The host started explaining, before anyone even asked. He said he was checking storm damage. Said he'd had trouble with the keypad before. Said he'd gone into the shed to get tools. Said he didn't want to disturb me. It was that last part that almost made me laugh in his face. The deputy taking my statement looked up at the sky once. Maybe because we all did. Clear. No storm. Not then. Not overnight. Nothing blown over. Nothing broken. Nothing that would have justified a man circling an occupied cabin and trying the doors until sunrise. I left as soon as they said I could. I didn't pack carefully. I threw clothes into my bag, left half the groceries, forgot a phone charger and notebook. Okay. And honestly didn't care. The host wasn't arrested while I was there. Maybe there wasn't enough for that. Maybe the threshold for what counts as criminal gets weird when the person trying to enter also owns the property. That's the part that bothered me almost as much as the night itself. How much room there seemed to be for everybody to call it a misunderstanding, if they wanted to. Airbnb refunded me after a lot of back and forth. They used all the standard language, concern, safety, escalation, and review processes. County deputies were more direct. One of them called me later because I kept pushing for an update, and he admitted, kind of carefully, that mine wasn't the first complaint they'd had tied to that rental. Not the first time guests felt the owner didn't understand the difference between managing a property and inserting himself into it whenever he felt like it. He didn't say exactly how many calls there had been, just several, over the years. That's the part I still can't get past. Not that one guy acted like a cabin with paying guests in it was still his to enter after midnight. It's that apparently enough people had complained for deputies to recognize the address, and the place stayed up anyway, waiting for the next person who saw total privacy in the listing and thought it meant what it said. The next one is a different kind of bad. It happened in the middle of a busy city, with people everywhere, which somehow made it worse. I was halfway down the stairs with my suitcase banging against my leg when I looked through the narrow stairwell window and saw him standing by the front entrance. He wasn't pacing. He wasn't trying to look casual in that obvious way people do when they're actually waiting for someone. He was just there, off to one side of the door under the streetlight, hands in his jacket pockets, like he had all night if he wanted it. I froze hard enough that the suitcase tipped forward and hit the next step. Up above me, on the 4th floor, my Airbnb door handle clicked again. Just once. Not loud. Just enough to tell me I hadn't imagined it the first time. My whole body went weird in that instant. Not screaming, not crying, none of that. More like everything from my chest down turned into this shaky, useless version of itself. My fingers felt numb around the suitcase handle. I remember thinking very clearly, if I go back up there, I run into whoever touched my door. If I go down, I walk past the same guy who's been showing up around me since this afternoon. And because the stairwell had those wired glass windows at each landing, I could see pieces of the street through them. Cars are going by, people walking to bars, a couple laughing outside some taco place on the corner. All these normal Friday night sounds, music leaking from somewhere. A bus is sitting at a stop. Nobody had any idea what was happening 10 feet above them. The guy by the entrance glanced down at his phone, then up toward the building like he was checking the time. That was the part that got me moving again. I picked up the suitcase instead of rolling it because I didn't want the wheels making noise, which was pointless because the thing was cheap and every zipper pull on it jingled when I moved. I basically half carried, half dragged it the rest of the way down, trying not to breathe too loudly, already planning to walk straight past the front door and into the brightest place I could find. At the time, I still hadn't fully admitted to myself that I was running. I was in Milwaukee for a certification exam the next morning, not a fun trip, not a weekend away. I was there because my job wanted this extra credential, and getting it meant a raise later if everything worked out, so I booked the cheapest place I could find that was within walking distance of the testing center. That was the whole decision process. Distance, price, reviews. I couldn't really afford a hotel downtown, especially not on short notice, and the loft looked clean, had a desk, had Wi-Fi, and was about a 10-minute walk from where I needed to be at 8 the next morning. I hate staying alone anywhere. I've always hated it. I'm one of those people who checks the lock 3 times in a hotel room and puts the "Do Not Disturb" sign on the handle even if I'm only there for one night. So booking an Airbnb in a building I didn't know, in a city I didn't know well, was already outside what I wanted to be doing. But I kept telling myself it was fine, because it was only one night, the area looked busy, and the reviews were all normal. A lot of comments about exposed brick and the industrial feel, and how close it was to restaurants. That last part actually helped me choose it. Busy equals safer. At least that was my logic. If anything weird happened, there would be people around. The building was an old warehouse converted into lofts, or at least that was the sales pitch. Tall windows, black metal railings, raw brick walls. That whole look where the place wants credit for not finishing the surfaces. Self-check-in again. Code for the main entrance. Different code for the apartment door. No front desk, no staff, nobody to ask questions. I got in around late afternoon, rode this ancient elevator that sounded tired, and found the unit with no problem. Inside, it looked exactly like the listing photos. I'll give it that. Big brick wall behind the bed. Cheap abstract painting over the couch in orange and navy. Tiny kitchen with those flat front cabinets that show every fingerprint. A little metal desk by the window. I remember thinking the place looked staged for a person with no belongings, but clean enough. I dropped my bag, plugged in my laptop, laid out my study materials, and texted my mom that I got there okay because she worries, and because, if I'm being honest, I like having somebody know where I am when I'm traveling alone. My plan was boring on purpose. Grab coffee, maybe a quick dinner, come back, review notes until around 10, shower, sleep, exam in the morning. I wasn't going out. I wasn't drinking. I wasn't trying to make a weekend of it. The first wrong thing happened at the coffee shop across the street. I had just ordered something too sweet and too expensive because I was anxious and not thinking clearly. I was standing off to the side, waiting for them to call my name, when a guy near the pickup counter looked over and said, "You finally got the heat working in that loft?" I turned, because he was looking directly at me. He was maybe late 30s, maybe early 40s. One of those faces that register as ordinary, until you have a reason to keep studying them. Dark jacket, trim beard, nothing dramatic. He smiled, like we already had context together. I said, "Sorry?" He nodded toward the building across the street and said, "The place with the brick wall bedroom. It was freezing last winter. Hope they fixed it." I actually laughed a little. I thought he recognized me from check-in somehow, which makes no sense now because I never met anyone at check-in. But in the moment, your brain always wants the easiest explanation. I figured maybe he lived in the building. Maybe he'd seen me coming in with luggage. Maybe he'd rented that same loft before. That all felt normal enough. So I said something like, "I just got there, so I guess I'll find out." Then he said my first name. Just my first name. Casual as anything. Like, "Well, good luck, Megan," or whatever, except with my actual name. I remember smiling automatically, because when somebody uses your name in a normal tone, your body wants to follow the script and treat it like they belong to your day. I said, "Have we met?" And he sort of shrugged and said, "We checked in around the same time." Again, that was enough of an explanation if I wanted it to be. A building entrance, keypads, maybe we crossed paths. Maybe he heard the host message me through the app, or saw the name on my coffee order, or any number of little public things. Nothing concrete enough to challenge him on without sounding dramatic. So I took my drink and left. And then, because I was already uncomfortable, I replayed it the whole walk back. The part that bothered me wasn't just the name. It was how he said the thing about the heat, like he knew that exact loft. Not the building in general. That unit. I told myself maybe he'd stayed there before. People book the same places. That's normal. When I got back upstairs, I looked around the room in that embarrassed way you do after somebody comments on your house, and suddenly you see it from outside. Brick wall, painting over the couch, stupid hanging Edison bulbs over the counter. Very recognizable space if you'd been in it before. I should have left it there. Instead, I started trying to prove to myself I was overreacting. I made instant noodles in a little saucepan with a loose handle. I sat at the desk and highlighted terms from my study guide. I called my sister for 10 minutes and kept the conversation light because I didn't want her telling me to just get a hotel and stop being cheap. Outside, it got louder as the evening went on. People on the sidewalks, car doors, a siren somewhere a few blocks off. It actually made me feel better for a while. Then, around dinner time, I went out to pick up food from a place down the block, and when I came back, he was across the street, not close to the building, just standing by a crosswalk signal with a paper cup in his hand. He lifted 2 fingers in a little wave the second he saw me. My stomach dropped so fast it almost felt like missing a step. Again, though, there was a ready explanation. Downtown area. People circle the same blocks, same coffee shops, same restaurants, same sidewalks. It could have been a coincidence. It should have been a coincidence. I nodded back because what else do you do when there are a dozen people around and somebody casually acknowledges you like you already know each other? I went inside, took the elevator up, let myself into the loft, locked the door. Maybe 2 minutes late, my phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. "How's the brick wall bedroom treating you?" I stared at it so long that the screen dimmed. No name, local number, no follow-up. I didn't answer. I checked the Airbnb app first, thinking maybe the host had some backup contact number and was reaching out weirdly. Nothing. No new message there. Then I checked the building details in the listing for any phone number posted. Nothing. So I sat on the edge of the bed with the phone in my hand and started doing the stupid scared person math. Could he have gotten my number from overhearing it somewhere? Did I say it out loud? Did I hand it to somebody? Is there some obvious connection I'm missing? Because that will always be your first instinct if you're alone. Not I'm in danger. There must be a normal explanation, and I'm the one failing to see it. I wish I could say I left right then. I didn't. I had an exam in the morning. My notes were all over the desk. I was already stressed, already tired, already feeling stupid for letting one stranger throw off my whole night. So I blocked the number, told myself if anything else happened I'd go, and tried to study. That lasted maybe 40 minutes. I couldn't focus. Every time somebody laughed on the sidewalk below, I looked up. Every time footsteps went past in the hall, my shoulders tightened. I kept checking the lock, then checking that the chain was on, then sitting back down and tried to memorize terms, while my eyes bounced to the door every 30 seconds. Around 10, maybe a little after, I finally gave up and started packing my bag just in case. Not in a full leaving way, more in a, if I wake up freaked out, at least I won't be stuffing chargers into pockets at midnight way. I had the suitcase open by the couch when I heard someone outside my door, not walking past, stopping. It is amazing how much information you can get from a pause. Hallway noise in apartment buildings is usually blunt. Steps, voices, elevator ding. This was different. Somebody came up the hall and then stopped directly outside my unit, and the silence after that stop had weight to it. Intent. I turned off the TV I had put on for background noise and just listened. Nothing. Then the softest touch on the handle. Not a push, not rattling, just pressure, careful and exploratory, like the person on the other side was seeing whether it might open without effort. I don't think I even chose what I did next. My body decided before my brain finished catching up. I zipped the suitcase, grabbed my laptop and exam materials, shoved them into my backpack without organizing anything, and went to the door as quietly as I could. The handle didn't move again. I put my eye to the peephole and saw only distorted hallway light. Whoever had touched it was no longer right there, or was standing too far to the side. That somehow made it worse. So I opened the door and got out. Not all the way, just enough to slide through with the suitcase. I locked it behind me as carefully as I could, then went for the stairs instead of the elevator, because the idea of getting trapped in that box for even a few seconds felt unbearable. And that's where this started, with me halfway down the stairs, seeing the guy from the coffee shop waiting by the front entrance, while the sound from my door came down through 4 floors of open stairwell. I didn't confront him. I didn't call out. I didn't do any of the things people always imagine they'll do when they're scared. I kept moving. When I hit the lobby, I turned like I was just another guest on my way out for the night. He looked up right away, smiled, almost. Not big, just enough to tell me he recognized me. I walked past the building entrance without slowing down, and kept going until I reached the hotel on the next block, the one with the glass front and the bright lobby, and the wedding party checking in. I went through those doors so fast I almost clipped a bell cart. The air in there smelled like lemon cleaner and somebody's expensive perfume. And I swear that's the first moment I felt anything close to relief. Because there were people, not nearby in theory, actually there, staff behind a desk, guests with bags. Music is playing too loudly from the bar. I booked a room on the spot even though it cost way more than I wanted to spend. I didn't even compare prices. I just handed over my card. Then, finally, I called the non-emergency line. I know people will say I should have called sooner. Maybe I should have. But when you're inside something like that, every step feels like overreacting until the next thing happens. And by then, you're already behind it. An officer met me at the hotel first, then went with me back to the loft building along with another officer. By then, the guy was gone. Of course he was. My Airbnb door showed no damage. My stuff was still inside. The officers were polite, but I could feel the problem immediately. I had a stranger who knew my first name, knew details about the loft, texted me from an unknown number, and appeared outside my building after quietly testing the handle. None of that is easy to turn into one clear charge. I grabbed my things and left. The host acted confused when I told them I wouldn't be staying the rest of the night. They said nobody else should have had access to the unit. They said maybe someone in the neighborhood recognized guests from all the suitcase traffic. They said downtown areas attract weird interactions sometimes, which was such a useless sentence that it made me want to throw my phone. I took the exam the next morning after maybe 3 hours of sleep. I passed, somehow. The whole time, I kept scanning the hallways in the testing center every time a door opened. For a while, I told myself that was the end of it. Weird man, weird night, bad luck. Then, maybe 2 months later, because apparently I enjoy making myself sick, I looked up the listing again. There was a new review, short and awkwardly worded. The kind people write when they're trying not to accuse someone directly of something. Most of it was normal. All, location, clean unit, convenient check-in. But one line said something like, "There was someone outside who knew too much about the apartment, which made me leave early." I took a screenshot because the second I read it, my whole body reacted like I'd heard that doorknob again. When I checked later that day, the review was gone. Not buried, gone. Maybe the guest deleted it. Maybe the platform removed it. Maybe there was some innocent explanation. I don't know. What I know is that every time I book a place now, I still zoom in on the reviews, looking for that one kind of sentence people write when they don't want to sound crazy. And I still have the screenshot from the morning. That comment was there, and the evening it wasn't. The last story is the one I keep coming back to, mostly because for a few hours I really thought I had explained it away. I noticed the boot prints before I even brought my second bag inside. The casita sat off to one side of the main property, maybe close enough to call it connected if you were being generous. But really it felt separate, which is why I booked it. Tiny detached rental on the outskirts of Sedona. No shared walls. Wide desert views. Quiet weekend. Exactly the kind of place people advertise with words like reset and restore. I had just finalized a divorce that had taken way too much time, way too much money, and way too much of my nervous system with it. And I wanted 2 nights somewhere nobody needed anything from me. That was the whole goal. Quiet. The host had pitched complete privacy, uninterrupted desert views, and easy self-check-in. All of that was technically true. The nearest visible house was far enough away that it looked flattened by the heat. A few other vacation places were scattered out there, but there was so much scrub and open ground between everything that once the sun started going down, each property felt like its own island. I parked, got out, and the first thing I saw was a muddy trail of boot prints leading along the side of the casita toward the attached garage. Muddy, which stood out right away because the rest of the ground was dry and dusty. Not soaked, not dramatic, just damp enough that each tread left a clear pattern. They ended at the garage side door. The garage itself was locked. No vehicle nearby. No ladder out. No tools. I remember standing there with one overnight bag in my hand, looking at those prints and doing the obvious mental filing. The owner had somebody doing maintenance. Somebody tracked mud from another job. Nothing to do with me. Fine. And honestly, after the year I'd had, I was in a mood to let normal explanations win. I wanted things to be ordinary so badly that I practically assisted the process. The casita was nice in a slightly overstyled way. Neutral furniture, woven throw blanket, a bowl of decorative stones on the coffee table. Good windows, though, I'll give it that. The back patio looked straight out toward open desert, with the red rocks further off, catching the last of the light. There was a paperback left on the side table that I almost laughed at because it was exactly the kind of aspirational rental touch somebody thinks divorced people come to Sedona to read. I had brought my own. I unpacked slowly, set a bottle of wine in the little fridge, put my hiking shoes by the door, took a shower to get the drive off me. When I stepped back outside with a glass of wine around sunset, the whole place looked worth every dollar. The rocks were doing that ridiculous red-orange thing they do out there. The air had cooled off just enough to feel clean, and for the first time in months there wasn't a TV on, in another room. There wasn't someone texting to ask where I had put a document. There wasn't any conversation waiting to go bad. I sat there until the light drained out of the landscape. That night I read in bed for a while, then turned off the lamp and listened to the quiet. I like being alone. Always have. Not in a dramatic, self-sufficient way. I just don't get rattled by it easily. Silence doesn't usually bother me. A place being remote doesn't automatically feel threatening. If anything, it's part of the appeal, which is why the vehicle woke me up before my brain had any story ready for it. No headlights. That was the first thing. I heard tires on gravel, low and slow, then stopped seeing light through the window. And when I got up and went to the side blind, there was a dark SUV parked near the garage with the lights still off. Engine running at first, then cut. It was near midnight, maybe a little after. I watched through a gap in the blind, while 2 people got out, both in dark clothes, one taller than the other. They didn't come toward the casita, didn't knock, didn't call out. They went straight to the garage side door carrying sealed plastic bins. The kind with latching lids. Not huge, but not small either. Storage bins. Practical. Identical. They moved like people who had done that exact set of motions before. Door open. Bin inside. Back to the vehicle. Another bin. Door shut. No argument. No confusion. No checking addresses. Then they got back in the SUV and left. Again with no headlights until they were farther down the drive. I stood there in the dark with the blind pinched between 2 fingers, waiting for the moment when it would make sense. Contractors, owner storage, delivery mix-up, any regular explanation. But the no headlights part stayed stuck in my head. That one detail kept every innocent version from settling fully into place. I almost called the host right then, and didn't. Midnight felt too late if I was wrong, and some stubborn part of me didn't want to become the newly divorced woman freaking out alone at a vacation rental over people moving storage bins. So I locked the door, checked the bathroom window, checked the side blind again, and got back into bed. I did not sleep much. Before sunrise, I gave up and made coffee with the little drip machine in the kitchen. The coffee tasted like hot cardboard, but it gave me something to do with my hands. When the sky got light enough, I went outside. Fresh tire tracks ran away from the garage area toward the drive. No vehicle anywhere on the property. The boot prints from earlier were still there too, dried at the edges now, overlapping in places with newer marks. I followed the tire tracks a little way with my eyes until they disappeared into the dust and rock. Again, normal explanations were available if I wanted them. Maybe the owner stored things in the garage. Maybe workers had the wrong timing. Maybe the property was bigger operationally than the listing suggested. None of that is automatically sinister. Still, I called the host. He answered on the second ring, sounding almost cheerful. I told him I had seen people come by late at night and use the garage. I kept my tone measured because I wanted measured back. He paused for about 1 second, then apologized and said he knew exactly what that was. Contractors, he said. They'd been doing some maintenance work at another property and accidentally came to the wrong address overnight to drop off equipment. He said he was mortified they had disturbed a guest. He said the garage wasn't connected to my rental space and I was completely safe. He even added a little laugh like, "Can you believe these guys?" Which I admit helped more than it should have. Because it was believable. That's the thing about a good false resolution. It doesn't sound perfect. It sounds ordinary enough that you feel silly for resisting it. I asked why they came so late. He said they were behind schedule. I asked why there were no headlights. He said they were probably trying not to shine them into the casita windows. He apologized again and offered a partial refund for the inconvenience. By the end of the call, I had talked myself down so successfully that I actually felt a little embarrassed. The kind of embarrassment that comes after you spend a night staring at shadows, and then the morning hands you paperwork and explanations. So I stayed. I went on my hike that afternoon, bought an overpriced sandwich and chips at a market, drove to a trailhead, and walked under that huge, dry Arizona sky, thinking maybe the whole point of the trip was to learn how to stop expecting every quiet moment to turn into another problem. I really did settle. Not completely, but enough. That evening, I sat on the patio again with a book. The desert cooled off. A few house lights blinked on in the distance. The nearest place was still several hundred yards away, far enough that if somebody stood outside and yelled, I probably wouldn't have understood the words. My phone had 1 bar if I held it near the back bathroom window, and almost nothing anywhere else. I noticed that, then noticed myself noticing it, and made a conscious decision not to start. This is fine, I told myself. People came to the wrong address. That's all. I even slept for a while. Then I woke up to the same gravel sound. No headlights again. This time, the fear arrived faster, because my body had already met the pattern. I slid out of bed and went low to the side window instead of standing in front of it. Another SUV. Maybe the same one, maybe not. Hard to tell in the dark. It stopped by the garage in almost the same place as the first night. But now, there were 3 people, and one of them didn't use a key. He stepped to a keypad mounted beside the garage door and punched in a code. I know this matters, because it removed the last innocent version I had been carrying around. Contractors at the wrong address don't keep coming back. Contractors at the wrong address don't know the code. Contractors at the wrong address don't arrive without headlights in the middle of the night and move with that practiced silence. The garage door didn't open all the way, just enough for them to slip through the side access after the lock released. One person was carried in another sealed bin, then another. I couldn't see much from where I was, so I moved carefully to the little side window near the bathroom. It had a bad angle on the garage, but if I stood just right, I could see through a narrow side window in the garage wall itself. What I saw through that glass is the reason I finally called the sheriff. There were already stacks of those bins inside. Not 2 or 3, rows of them. Same size, same color, same sealed lids. All lined along shelving and on the floor as they belonged there. Like this had been happening for a while. That garage wasn't being used for occasional storage. It was being used for something regular. I backed into the bathroom because that was the one spot where my phone would sometimes hold a signal if I stood near the shower with my arm up like an idiot. My hand was shaking hard enough that I hit the wrong number once before I got to the sheriff's office. When dispatch answered, I kept my voice low and gave them the address twice. Remote rental property outside Sedona, people returning to the garage in the middle of the night, multiple vehicles across 2 nights, repeated access. I could see a large number of sealed containers inside. The dispatcher asked if the people were threatening me directly. No, I said, and then corrected myself. Not directly. They weren't even looking at the casita. That was almost the worst part. I was right there on the same property, and I still felt irrelevant to whatever they were doing, which made me think they would not react well if they suddenly had to account for me. She asked if I could leave. I looked through the bathroom door toward the front of the casita and pictured walking into open dark to my car on a property where at least 3 people were moving between the garage and an SUV. No, I said, I don't think I can get to the car without them seeing me, so she told me to stay where I was and keep talking if I could. I turned off the bathroom light and sat on the closed toilet lid with the phone against my ear and the shower curtain cool against my arm. The room smelled faintly like hotel soap and dust. Every few seconds, I heard the dull thump of a container being set down, then feet on gravel, then the soft electric sound of the keypad again. I remember thinking how ridiculous it was that I had come out there to celebrate being finally legally free of one exhausting situation, and now I was sitting in a bathroom whispering to a dispatcher while strangers loaded a garage 10 yards away. At one point, someone walked closer to the casita than before. I heard footsteps pause outside, and my whole body locked. Not because they knocked. They didn't. I think the person was just checking the space between buildings, making sure the path was clear. But those few seconds, hearing someone that close to the wall while I was hidden in a bathroom, felt longer than the rest of the night put together. The dispatcher told me units were close. I wanted to ask how close. I wanted a minute count, a map, anything. Instead, had I sat there listening to my own breathing and trying not to make the phone screen light up too brightly. Then everything changed fast. Voices outside, sharper now. A car engine is starting. Another one. Then from farther out, tires on gravel coming in too quickly to belong to the same careful routine. Doors, commands, more than one vehicle. The dispatcher said deputies are on scene. Stay inside. I did. I stayed in that bathroom until somebody knocked hard on the front door and identified himself twice. When I opened it, there were sheriff's deputies everywhere, red and blue light moving over the gravel and the pale walls of the casita, turning the desert scrub strange colors. One SUV was still on the property. Another had apparently tried to leave and been stopped at the road. I could see figures being separated near the drive, but nobody told me much. A deputy took my statement in the kitchen, while another looked around outside. I told them about both nights, the host's explanation, the keypad, the rows of bins through the side window. He didn't react much while I talked, which I appreciated, because sometimes calm is the only useful thing a person can give you. Eventually, they asked if I had somewhere else to stay. I said yes, before I had even thought it through. I would have said yes if the nearest option had been sleeping in my car in a grocery store parking lot. I packed in under 5 minutes. 2 nights earlier, I had folded everything neatly into drawers and set books on the bedside table and lined my shoes up by the door like I was arriving somewhere restful. That night, I shoved clothes into a bag and left a half bottle of wine in the fridge. One deputy escorted me to my car while others were still moving around the garage area. I didn't get a good look inside in the daylight because they kept the space blocked, But I did see enough to know I hadn't imagined the scale. They were carrying container after container out to their vehicles. Dozens. More than would make sense for somebody accidentally storing tools at the wrong address. The host never called me that night, not once. He did send a message the next day saying there had been an active investigation on an adjacent structure and guest areas were never at risk. That phrasing was so careful, it almost sounded generated. Adjacent structure, guest areas, never at risk. Like what mattered most was not what had happened, but how narrowly it could be described. I tried to follow up later. Public records, local reports, anything. I found almost nothing. A short notice about law enforcement activity in the area. No details are worth anything. No clear explanation of what those containers held. No statement made the whole thing settle into one answer I could put away. So this is the part that stays with me. Not the headlights off. Not the keypad. Not even the fact that people were using a vacation rentals garage for some routine business they clearly did not want noticed. It's that officers carried out dozens of identical sealed containers, and after all that movement, and all those lights, and all that quiet official language, no report I ever found explained why they had been stored there in the first place.